Yeah, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Radio Sophia. The COVID-19 pandemic has disturbed the old paradigm of macroeconomic theories, especially when the supply chains have been disrupted and the demand side plunging. Clearly, the pandemic is forcing a rethink in business cycle theories. And to enlighten us on the business cycle theories before and after the pandemic, we are privileged to have with us Professor Parantap Basu, Professor of Macroeconomics, Durham University. Professor Basu, prior to joining Durham University, held positions at Fordham University and Case Western Reserve University in the United States. He has held visiting positions for research and teaching at various universities, which include University of Essex in the UK, Tilburg University in the Netherlands, University of Sydney in Australia, Auckland University, IGIDR, Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis, and St. Louis in the United States. Professor Basu has widely published in various fields of macroeconomics, which include macrofinance, growth and development, business cycle theory. He is a recipient of the Hind Ratan, the Jewel of India Award in 2020. Thank you for accepting the invite, Professor Basu. We look forward to having a really engaging session today and understand the possible changes in business cycle theories. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Himadri, for this generous introduction. Thank you. Okay, I'm very happy to be here, and of course, not physically, virtually. And so Himadri contacted me to talk about business cycle in general. Then I started thinking about what can I really say. Then at the end, I thought that I should give an overview of business cycle theories and what kind of challenge business cycle modeling is facing after the pandemic. So this is a disclaimer, whatever I'm telling is not necessarily sacrosanct. It could be, particularly after pandemic, things are very fluid. We're all rethinking how to model business cycles when there are pandemics. I have also done some work. So I've been also actively doing some research on business cycle modeling. So don't take anything that I say for granted. This is the disclaimer, okay? So as I understand that I'm addressing PhD students and they have background in economics, so I will still give a broad overview where we are coming from to make it of general interest, and then we probably try to get to some specifics, but I will try to minimize equations as much as I can. I think there will be very few equations, okay? And all right. So let me start with the big picture. When I was in university, we learned history of economic thought. So we came to learn about this Say's law of market. This French economist, I think it is about 200 years ago. I think Jean-Baptiste Say, he just invented this law. He just said it is almost like a slogan: supply creates its own demand. So it is Say's law about all the problems in the economy are really coming from the supply side. If we take this particular law at its face value. So all we need to do is to get rid of the bottlenecks, supply bottlenecks. The underlying assumption is that the economy is already at full employment. There are no frictions. Frictions means impediments to free functioning of markets. And there are several such impediments we can think of. So one cornerstone, that all prices and wages are flexible. That's a major friction that is completely not there. It's absent. So in such an environment, if we expand the supply base of the economy by boosting productivity, then there will be always demand. So supply will create its demand. So all the bottlenecks are really arising from the supply side. So policy implication is that get rid of all the impediments, give supply side incentives, give corporation tax breaks so that they can produce more, innovate more, and things will be hunky-dory. It will be great. Okay. So that's the Say's law of markets. Now, then the Great Depression came, and then we all know John Maynard Keynes. He basically reversed the Say's law, right? So there is widespread unemployment, excess capacity in the economy. Am I audible? Everything okay?
Yes, sir, audible.
Yeah, okay. So there is widespread unemployment and excess capacity in the economy. So during that time, so what really then turned out that demand is really the bottleneck. All you need to do is to boost demand, and demand will create its own supply because the economy is already operating at excess capacity, unemployment. There is unemployment. So so what is the ramification? How can you increase demand? What is the reason for shortage of demand? There are many reasons, but I think what is topical nowadays when you are talking about this, that if there is widespread inequality, this is one thing that I can think of. Demand will be low because it is quite well known that poor have higher marginal propensity to consume. There are lots of have-nots, then we will not have enough demand. At this point, we need all kinds of demand incentives, cash transfer, things like that, which we are talking now, that can be given to the poor to boost aggregate demand. So this is the big picture. So now, what is the business cycle theory before the pandemic? Let me just give a tour of history. This will be rather quick. So it's quite a few things. I'm just going to survey. It is like a, it's a very, very quick trip, right? Quick tour. So 1960s, if we start from 1960s, we had these large scale macroeconometric models of Klein and Goldberger. And that they looked quite impressive, but there was lots of misgivings about those models, and they were called atheoretical. I think this word came from my advisor's article, Theoretical Macroeconometric Models, Tom Cooley. So this was the Cowles Commission's research program. But this problem with these models was that these models were not micro-founded, and policies were treated as inputs and everything happening as output. And that, like government spending, money supply, you put this as input and you get output, GDP, unemployment, things like that. So the problem with this approach is that it does not formulate people's expectations. When the government changes policy, it changes people's expectations. And that is the cornerstone of Lucas' critique. And that actually won him a prize. So Bob Lucas argued that policy should not be formulated in an expectation-free manner. This econometric policy evaluation paper, then the rational expectation revolution, that when there is a change in policy, people change their expectation. If there's a tax cut, whether it will be permanent or temporary, people start wondering, then that will have an impact on their labor supply decisions. And all kinds of changes makes things very, very interesting and of course more complex. So we can't just treat policy as an input because it is endogenous, right? So then we had this 80s real business cycle revolution. This classic work of Kydland and Prescott, 1981. And before then, Prescott wrote probably another paper, maybe at the same time, Theory Ahead of Measurement. So these RBC models basically take this Say's law forward. I interpret RBC model as a fancy dynamic Say's law economy where we have stochastic productivity shocks, right? Productivity shocks are random, stochastic. And that could be due to innovation. That could be a positive shock, Bill Gates, large negative shock, pandemic, all kinds of things. We can talk about okay, we'll talk about pandemics. It is not just a large negative shock. There are many other things. Okay, so now here it is. So business cycles therefore arise primarily due to these exogenous productivity shocks, these shocks which are coming, right? Now, here is a bare bone example of RBC model, which I teach in my class. And I think any economics student can understand this. We have a production function, aggregate, a Cobb-Douglas with capital, labor, NT, capital stock, AT is this labor productivity shock, which comes directly, right? Then there is an investment technology that given the current capital stock, which has depreciated by a fraction delta, this is the undepreciated capital stock right now. And if you put new investment, you get capital KT plus 1 at the end of the period. So these are two technologies. One is the production technology. Second is the investment technology. Then we have the goods market equilibrium condition. Think of it as a closed economy, no government. So YT equal to CT plus IT. The immediate implication is that saving equal to investment because YT minus CT equal to saving. And then we have a behavioral equation, which is an Euler equation, right? Which comes from individuals optimization problem. Basic idea is that individuals are forward looking. They are maximizing lifetime stream of utilities. Utilities are derived from consumption. U of CT is the utility function. U prime CT is the marginal utility of consumption. So Euler equation is really telling you, it is giving a mandate. What is the basic principle of optimal investment? How much capital you will buy today? If you buy 1 unit of capital stock today, you sacrifice 1 unit of consumption. It's a real model. That means your utility loss is the marginal utility of consumption. Next period, what do you get? You get return to capital, which is the marginal product of future capital. But of course, that's uncertain. You don't know what will be the return to capital. That's the reason we have an expectation. And then we have the resale value of capital, 1 minus delta, the capital which has already depreciated, but the remaining part you are ready to sell in a resale market. So this is the gross return to capital, and that utility value of that discounted, beta is the discount factor. That's the Euler equation. That is basically guiding you how you should invest. So this is the left hand side is the marginal utility cost of investment. Right hand side is the marginal utility of benefit. You can think of the discount. So given this structure, what's going on? If there is a positive labor supply shock, what is going to happen? Marginal product of labor, capital, the shift up. There is positive wealth effect. Things are all going up except one thing. Saving, investment, they go up, GDP goes up, but there is diminishing returns. Don't forget that, right? If there is more investment given labor, there's the marginal return to capital falls, and therefore investment incentive slowly tapers off, and then economy goes up, and then it starts falling, right? So that's the propagation of business cycle. This is a simple story of RBC. So if you have, so what's the lesson from there? That a business cycle has stochastic fluctuations, which are due to optimal responses of competitive agents to productivity shock, and business cycle will be persistent if the technology shocks are persistent, or if there is richer production technology, or there are many other things, or depending on how the technology is characterized, depending on how people depending on people's attitude towards risk, we will see the amplitude of business cycle. And the business cycle can range, and the exact period of the business cycle is also quite debatable. NBER has certain mandate, some certain guidelines. So basically fluctuations in this model, you have fluctuations, which is business cycle, and there is growth. But these models have nothing to say about growth. Growth is trend growth, which is exogenous, and fluctuations are separated from growth. So business cycle and growth, they are decomposed, right? But that's the basic idea. So growth is exogenous, not endogenous, right? Okay, please feel free to ask me questions if you have any clarificatory question, any question that you have, I'm happy to answer. Okay. Yeah. So what happened in the 1990s? What happened to these RBC models? There are lots of issues about these models. There are unpleasant implications of RBC model, that the monetary policy is not playing any role. It is a real model, right? So money is kind of neutral monetary policy. So except some minor inflation tax consequences, inflation taxes are very small. When there is increase in money, then there will be some inflation. It could have some effect on people's real people's behavior and allocation, but that this welfare cost. So my advisor Cooley, Thomas Cooley and Hansen wrote a paper on this. That inflation welfare cost is rather minimal. So RBC models could not generate any big effects of real monetary policy, and particularly when the monetary policy is more realistic monetary policy, particularly during the 90s, was more of changes in interest rate. So changes in interest rate, or even money supply, this kind of thing has really not that much of an effect in an RBC framework. Particularly, why? Because of this assumption of flexible wages and prices. Then a new breed of models started. There now, see, we started with Say's law. Now we are going back to Kinship model, but these are new Kinship models. New Kinship models, then they bring the sticky prices, sticky wages back again. Rothenberg, Woodford, Galley, and others. These are basically more glorified RBC model with frictions. Frictions are nominal frictions, where you are bringing price rigidity, wage rigidity, particularly price rigidity. Now, let me just give some quick overview of this new Kinship model. The basic cornerstone of this new Kinship model is this Phillips curve. We all know what is a Phillips curve, right? Meaning that if economy is overheated, there will be higher inflation. If you start with full employment and if the economy is overheated, goes above potential, then overheating means inflation will be above the natural rate. So how can you get this kind of Phillips curve? This Phillips curve is the very foundation of this business cycle, that inflation and business cycles, they're connected, right? So there are two kinds of models, particularly one is this Calvo type of model where we bring nominal rigidity. Some producers, they fix the price every period, they set the price, and the other producers, they stick to the old price. But fundamental principle here is that we don't have a perfect market. There is monopolistic competition, imperfect market structure, differentiated goods. There are differentiated producers. That's very important, right? And that gives rise to some power of price fixation. So producers can set price monopolistically. So if we go back to our basic micro, you know that in a competitive economy, price will be equal to marginal cost. In a monopolistic economy, price will be greater than marginal cost, right? And there will be less than competitive output. So fundamentally, if we look at imperfect competition, output will be always below the competitive output. So there will be a notion of a flexible price output, but that flexible price output is not a competitive output. It is the output at which price is greater than marginal cost. So this is one element of friction. Markets are not competitive. Okay. Second friction is that the prices are staggered. Price adjustment is staggered, meaning some producers, they set the price instantaneously in response to a shock. Some producers are laggards, they stick to the old price. Okay, so that's the structure of Calvo. So theta fraction of producers, they stick to the old price last year's. 1 minus theta, say they just set the price in a monopolistic fashion. So what is going on here? I can then write this basic identity that there is a desired price P30 and this is the marginal cost. So this is the desired markup, right? In a flexible price economy, the actual markup will be equal to the desired markup. But in a sticky price economy, it is not going to be happen. There is another element here, which is we call price adjustment gap. This is an identity. PT over MCT is P30 upon MCT times P30 upon PT inverse, right? This is an identity. This we call price adjustment gap. This is coming from King and Woolman paper. It's very good way to explain the basic idea of New Keynesian Phillips curve. So what is going on? In a flexible price economy, this is one. That means actual markup is equal to the desired market. But in a sticky price economy, they are not. What's happening? There is in the economy, you have a rising marginal cost schedule, and we have heterogeneous firms. Firms are heterogeneous because we have firms with different price adjustment history. Some firms are setting the price now. Some firms set the price last year. Some firms set the price 2 years before. So we have a variety of firms. We have a continuum of firms. They're sitting on this marginal cost curve. This is the marginal cost curve function. We all know what is that. Output, if we fix output at YTN, perhaps I can experiment a bit with my visualizer here. Can you see it, what I'm writing?
Yes, sir, visible.
Okay, this is very good. So this is output. This is marginal cost. We have a rising marginal cost schedule. The economy is at YN, say full employment. This is YN, and this year we have zero inflation. Okay. Now, firms are sitting all over here. This is because they are heterogeneous, right? With different prices. So if it turns out that the economy-wide output is above YN, that means many firms, many of the firms are, I think the cluster of the masses of firms are such that we are here. That means the marginal cost is above the natural level. So if that is the case, what's going to happen? That means marginal cost is so high, but the prices are adjusting slowly. Therefore, actual markup will be below the desired markup. So what will these firms do? They'll try to adjust their price upward. And if they want to adjust it upward, P30 upon PT will be higher so that it will come to an equality, right? This two. And in that case, if you try to adjust your price upward, what will happen to the inflation? Inflation will be higher. So that's the basic essence of new Keynesian-Phillips curve. If output is above the natural output, inflation will be above the natural rate, zero inflation rate, right? So staggered price adjustment can make monetary policy then non-neutral. It can have significant real effect, okay? And that monetary policy can is really formulated in terms of a policy rate, interest rate rule, like a Taylor rule, which is that if the output is above natural rate, central bank raises rate, and vice versa, okay? So what is going on? This is really resurrection of Keynesian models in a stochastic dynamic economy, okay? Now, then we had this Great Recession of 2008. And there, things changed in a very different way. There, the problem happened with the saving investment equality, okay? We always assume in these models that there is no gap between saving and investment. Whatever you are saving, there are financial intermediaries, they take that money and they channelize to productive investment. But that didn't actually happen during Great Recession. These intermediaries, they did funny things. Not only that, your funds were misappropriated. It went into wrong projects, lemon projects. People started losing faith in the banking system. So this intermediation process was not going smoothly. So this saving investment nexus got broken during the Great Recession. Your saving may be misdirected. It can be invested in lemon projects. These are examples of model hazard. Model hazard can come from the borrower's side, meaning projects may be bad. Lenders may be corrupt. They can run away with your money. That's lender's model hazard. The introduction of such credit market friction gives rise to a new breed of models. Okay, and this could become so. Basically, if we have this kind of financial market frictions, and there is also negative productivity shock, what will happen? You will have a great recession, major recession. Maybe that's what happened. People are still trying to understand it. So these are some of the models like Bernanke, Gartler, Gilchrist. They also wrote this thing a little bit before the recession. Then Gartler Karadi is a very good paper, 2013, which talks about lenders model hazard. Okay. Now the pandemic. So we talked about all these business cycle theories before the pandemic. What did the pandemic do? Things became quite complicated. How did this pandemic complicate business cycle model. So we had this RBC model, new Kinship model, financial friction models. Now, once the pandemic hits, how did it complicate things? So what is the what is the basic uh, what is the major effect of a pandemic? How can you view a pandemic? Pandemic is a huge negative labor productivity shock. That's for sure. People are getting sick. They cannot go to work, right? So, but it has a new, so it is not just an RBC model with a large negative shock. You can't do that. Why? Because there is a problem. Problem is that we have social distancing. People are getting infected and therefore they are staying home. There is government mandate. Don't go outside. You can't go to work. You can't go to restaurants. You can't go to theaters. So so social distancing gives rise to demand complications. So what starts as a negative supply side shock has serious adverse effects on aggregate demand. So aggregate demand and supply cannot be just separated like that, right? You can't have a Say's law economy. You can't have a new Keynesian economy. We need to rethink how we can model this pandemic. Now, this pandemics not only had this kind of problem, it had differential effects. There was unbalanced growth. Certain sectors which are offline intensive, they got badly hit, right? Online digital sector started booming. If you look at the digital stocks, they did actually 20 digital stocks did greatly during this pandemic. So, so you have this online, Amazon, they're all doing fine, actually. It is a blessing for them, right? So countries with, but so it has differential effects on different kinds of production sectors, right? It had different effects on on the population. Age composition matters. People with aging population got badly affected at the beginning. In fact, we documented that. I think there's a paper that I published with Kunal Sen in Ideas for Economics, right during that. We documented that. But then also there's another paper that I have recently published with Ritik Mazumdar. The dense and less dense populated regions got affected differently. Like, this is in the context of India. This is the Indian Economic Review. It has appeared. So the densely populated regions, industrial regions in India, Maharashtra and other places, they got badly affected. Rural and less densely populated regions got affected differently. That was before this new wave, okay? But now everybody is getting affected. Even less dense areas also getting affected. We need to rethink about this now. So we actually use the COVID data to document this. So there are differential effects of pandemic, even like inequality and pandemic, that matters. Low and high income people got affected differently. Social distancing behavior differs between the rich and the poor. We documented that in a recent paper that actually not too recent, 3-4 months ago in Berkeley Electronic, I think Berkeley B Journal of Macro with Clive Bell and Hugh Edwards. So we looked at 81 UTLA districts in UK, and we saw that poor's distance less compared to rich, and therefore there is definitely poor cannot afford this kind of social distancing protocols for obvious reasons, and that basically means that social distancing behavior also differs among the rich and the poor. This needs to be taken into account. There is digital inequality, and this digital inequality also exacerbates the demand side recession that we're talking about. Okay, so these are the challenges. I'm just telling you. I'm just stating these are the challenges that we are facing when we model business cycle. Banking and pandemic. Even when you look at the banking sector, interesting things happened. We looked at the data, particularly I think for the US. I don't know about India. There are lots of project failures. Banks basically shifted their portfolio. This is a bad thing, But the good thing is the housing sector remarkably boomed, right? And therefore, banks, they shifted their portfolio from commercial to non-commercial and residential uh, lending. Okay, so this shift in portfolio, it may have some implications. We don't know yet. This needs to be modeled. Okay, so this is something. So I'm just telling you what are the things you guys can do to model pandemics. You can look at the banking sector where there is a shift in portfolio and see what is the aggregate implications of that. So now I'm going to give you a broad overview that how should a business cycle model look like. Now, I cannot assert that this is the best way to do it, but people have started doing this like this. This paper by Eichenbaum, Rebello, and Trabant, this I think was published during the early stage of the pandemic. What they do, they bring an epidemiological equation in the RBC model. So we have this epidemiological equation is also known as SAR equation. SAR means susceptible, infected, and recovered. The three types of agents. So you have heterogeneity, the three types of susceptible, infected, and recovered. And people who die, we don't, well, that's gone case. We can't say much about this. So SAR, this is the typical SAR equation that I have also used this in our IER paper. So increase in infection delta IT, it depends on this epidemiological dynamic. It depends on this right-hand side variable. So this basically means that susceptible and infected, if they are in contact, there is a fraction beta that they might infect each other, right? Therefore, infections will rise. So this beta times ST times IT, this is adding to infection, and gamma is the rate of recovery. So this lowers the infection. And we have also added a policy variable, AT, like public health policy and others, vaccine, that could lower infection. This is the equation that we took forward and we estimated. What happens? We know that people cut back consumption, labor supply to avoid infection, but this magnifies the recession. So basically, this particular equation is not exactly this, but the basic spirit is this. Eichenbaum, Rebello, and Trabant, they looked at a heterogeneous agent RBC model, and they bring this SAR equation and see what is the implication. So the additional complication is that competitive equilibrium is not socially optimal anymore. There's another important principle. There could be competition, but social distancing creates complication. What's the complication? Because people do not internalize fully their social distancing behavior on others. So I can behave recklessly and I can infect others. So there is externality, negative externality from social distancing. So even the markets are competitive because of this social distancing and its differential effects, and particularly free riding problems. Some people may not even bother to distance. Some young people might think that, well, we are not going to get infected, so why bother? But that's not true anymore. Now young people are also getting infected. Okay, so nature is taking revenge in some way or other. Okay, so you can't be reckless. That's nature is teaching us. Okay, so this is a very key equation that a pandemic business cycle model should bring, I think. Okay, now we also have new policy challenges. Public health policy challenge is that what is the optimal containment policy? What is the optimal lockdown policy? There is a trade-off between lives and livelihood. How far can we push this? This is a challenge. Second challenge is stabilization policy. Traditional stabilization tools on the monetary policy front, we knew before that if you lowered the policy rate, then the economy, when the economy is slowing down, lower the rate and run deficit on the fiscal front. But the problem is that already the problem started during Great Recession. Interest rate hit the zero lower bound. There is not much room to lower it anymore, right? So there is insufficient room to fight adverse shock to the economy. New monetary tool was needed. So when Bernanke brought this quantitative easing, okay, quantitative easing just does not necessarily mean printing money. Actually, there's a very recent article in Financial Times which I posted on my Facebook page, which basically telling us that don't call money fiat. Money is not free. Even if the central bank creates more money, it has to be backed by asset. Okay, the money has to be understood properly. So anyway, this QE basically means that central bank is purchasing asset purchase program, and they are giving reserve to the banking system so that they can loan. But the problem is that its effects are questionable because banks were sitting with their reserve. They were not loading it. So the credit channel was not opening up. That's another problem. So after the pandemic, basically now people have started rethinking about fiscal policy, which was kind of neglected before in business cycle. Most of the time, central bank was playing the role of an inflation controller, but not anymore. It is basically inflation is less of a problem. 2% inflation. Do we really need 2%? Maybe you can increase it 4%. Some people have started talking, right? So basically, fiscal stimulus program. See, it's a gigantic Biden stimulus program. How many trillion dollars I've forgotten. So that fiscal stimulus program also gave rise to controversy whether it will be inflationary or not. So this is a new policy challenge. Okay, if we want to rethink the role of fiscal policy, how should we rethink? Already the theory is there. Before the pandemic, people have developed this theory. We have this fiscal theory of price level, which is very interesting, that the government, you cannot look at fiscal policy in isolation. You have to look at fiscal policy in terms of a government budget constraint. You should think fiscal policy in coordination with monetary policy. So I think this recent, I also recommend PhD students to watch this Marcus Academy webinars, which happens every Thursday. So this is the thing I picked up from one of their webinars, which is fantastic actually. This Marcus presented a paper, Marcus Barnheimer. So the basic principle is that we have this real value of government debt, BT plus MT. BT is the stock of debt and MT is the money, okay? Divided by PT. It is very easy to understand how much the real value of government debt have to be backed via the budget, government budget concept. You should have enough surpluses, primary surpluses, right? Tax minus government spending. And it's discounted stream, and there's a stochastic discount factor. And this you can generate from any kind of a government budget constraint, and then with individual optimization, dynamic optimization, you get the stochastic discount factor. But in addition, there is a bubble term, okay? So it's like government debt is an asset, and therefore it will have a bubble, and the bubble can be triggered if the real interest rate is negative, okay? And that can cause major problem. The basic idea is that we anticipate that the primary surpluses will go down due to this kind of stimulus and other programs, then given positive BT and MT, PT has to be higher, right? So that's the fiscal theory of price level. So persistent deficit being lowered, the right-hand side term, and given a positive stock of debt, this means the higher current price level. So this is the way fiscal stimulus can possibly ignite inflation, right? So Larry Summers is very concerned about it. He's very, very concerned that this bit fiscal stimulus program is not the right way to go. Okay, so how much time? I'll probably take another 5-10 minutes, okay? Finishing. Is that okay? So there is another issue. Oliver Blanchard has recently written a book, which I'm thinking about reading, and he presented a paper also in this Marcus. Maybe I have already kept a copy. Okay, anyway, I don't want to mess this up. So Olivier Blanchard is warning that the advanced economies, advanced countries, they're facing another problem. This problem started before the pandemic. This is the problem of secular stagnation since the last decade, okay? Real interest rate has been falling steadily. It has been falling very, very sharply, okay? I don't know whether I can get this thing. Sorry, no, I don't want to mess it up. Okay, so just go to Marcus Academy's I think seminar series. You will see all these transcripts, all these YouTubes, and you can just watch Olivier Blanchard's presentation. It is very, very interesting. But it's a lot of food for thought. I'm still trying to understand what he's saying. Okay, so what the main point is, real interest rate is falling. So if the real interest rate is below the growth rate, balanced growth rate, then you can see via the Euler equation that growth will not be sustainable. Okay, that will give rise to secular stagnation. The real culprit, well, what is the reason? Some people think the real culprit behind this is the shortage of aggregate demand, but I'm not quite sure about that. Okay, so, but again, should we stick to 2% inflation target? Perhaps we can raise it. These are open questions. Also, running persistent budget deficit may not be too bad if R is less than G. You can also check that easily using a government budget constraint. That if you can keep the debt GDP ratio at a sustainable level but by running persistent deficit. Debt GDP ratio is already very, very high in many countries, but many people think it is a big problem. May not be a big problem. Okay, so depending on, of course, on other long-term consequences at this point, how you handle the deficit, these are the questions that we need to think. Okay, I'll wrap up. What is the punchline? The punchline is that the pandemic teaches one lesson to us. What is the lesson? That a simple toolkit macro model is not going to work anymore. You can't have just a run-of-the-mill macro model and say, oh, this is pandemic, a negative shock. No, okay? It's not going to work. There are so many challenges faced by macroeconomic researchers, modeling business cycles. COVID is unlikely to go away. It's going to stay with us, right? So as I wrote yesterday in Facebook that I'm always, a new thing I'm carrying all the time is my mask. Some cotton mask, every day I'm washing it and again drying it and taking it. So it will be another attire that we have to wear rest of our life, maybe, who knows? So COVID is unlikely to go away. So a business cycle model should take into account the spread of infections when the economy picks up. Economy will pick up, infections will spread. Fatality is important. We don't want people to die, but maybe it will be like influenza, it will be like a flu, it will come and go, we have to deal with it. The researchers should think seriously about the effect of fiscal stimulus program at the same time, how this complicated interaction between business cycles, infection, business cycle, how they are interacting through a SAR model. What is the optimal degree of fiscal intervention? We need to think, we need to balance the costs and benefit. How much inflation should we tolerate? And for emerging market economies, there are more problems. We don't even know what is the optimal fiscal policy because the fiscal room is very little. In fact, I published a paper in Economic Inquiry in 2020 where you look at this fiscal aspect also. If we found that fiscal policy can be quite effective, but how much fiscal room is there in the Indian economy, I'm not quite sure about that. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Professor Basu. So, I mean, that was a really very lucid way of understanding the entire history of business cycles. I'll ask people to have, raise questions, if any. Before people start asking questions, Professor Basu, I had a couple of questions to ask you.
Sure.
Yeah, so since you also covered the 2008 crisis and then you came to the pandemic, so do you think in some way the 2008 crisis was more, it affected the investment more, while in terms of the pandemic, it affected the consumer spending more? So if we kind of go back to the Y is equal to C plus I plus G old equation, do you think the effect on consumer spending has been more in the pandemic crisis compared to the 2008 crisis, and that will kind of give some difference in results?
So you're asking whether the pandemic is really an investment shock or consumption shock. Is this
no,
what you're asking?
I'm actually asking pandemic is whether it's, yeah, exactly. My argument was more in favor of it being a consumption shock.
Not sure. Pandemic is primarily a labor supply shock at the beginning. That started. It is a large negative productivity shock, right? That gave rise to consumption shock, as I explained, that then you have to socially distance and then things close, we can't go to, we can't buy things, then so consumption shock is of course there, but consumption shock will also be coming when people get infected and they're out of work, right? And then the question is how the government is handling, like in the UK, they're giving this furlough, they have the furlough program, they're supporting people that they're just, even if they lose jobs or they're away from work, they are given some government support. So consumption or demand part is kind of protected to some extent, but it is more of a production shock accompanied by investment shock. After that, there is negative investment. Of course, people see that where can I really invest? So again, there is unbalanced effects. Certain sectors can boom. As I said, housing sector started booming a lot. Okay, so you can't just get a simple answer to this question, but I think I should say that it started as a large productivity shock. Negative.
If we kind of connect this to the various stimulus packages that have been announced by the countries, including that of India, which is actually focused a lot on, say, guarantees and deferred liabilities. So that is more kind of, and there have been people who've been calling for it for stimulus packages to be designed in favor of consumption. So do you think the stimulus packages in favor of the investment, which is what most governments are trying to do, at least Indian government is trying to target, is the right strategy?
Well, I think that's a good question. So I don't know, have a clear answer to that, but the way I view it, if you look at the United States, they are just giving a consumption subsidy blanket, right? You get $1,400. Middle income Americans, everybody's going to get that, okay? And it can go up to 2,000. And what do? You just take this money and then you spend the way you like, okay? So that's like a consumption subsidy. But investment subsidy is a very different thing. I'm not sure how much investment subsidy the Biden administration is doing. They're talking about infrastructural spending. That is going to have an overall effect on aggregate production. But in India, I don't know exactly the optimal exact mix of consumption subsidy and investment subsidy. Maybe you can tell me. I'm not following that right now. So what is the exact proportion? Is there any particular number that you have? Because I think they are doing both at the same time. Sitaraman's budget, I think, is more geared towards investment. That's my feeling, right? And they say that we are going to boost the production sector. They don't talk much about consumption. Right. So I have a feeling, well, personally, I have a feeling that both have to be done at the same time. But the importance should be there more on the production side, with a caveat that we should not just make the companies which are already doing very well and just help the crony capitalism. That's not the way we should be subsidizing investment. We should look at SME, small, medium enterprises, whether the money is going there. They are badly hit. So how the money is directed is very, very important. Okay.
Right. So we have a few questions in the chat box. I'll take them one by one. So there's a question by Professor Vidhu Shekhar. He's a professor at the SP Jain Institute. He's asking you to connect is connecting technology shock helping the economy? Vidhu, if you could unmute yourself and maybe explain the question a bit better. Maybe I'm not very clear with the exact question, what he meant. Anyways, we'll come to the next one by Krishanu Pradhan. So Krishanu Pradhan says the modern monetary theory doesn't accept the existence of public debt sustainability issue in the face of flexible exchange rate. They're asking for government to spend by printing money. So the question is, how will the MMT be helpful if it is integrated with the RBC models?
What is MMP?
Modern monetary theory.
Okay, the issue of exchange rate, I have not discussed this. But the main point is that it is not true. I don't know that I'm answering that question, and I don't quite follow that question, but I'll try. But the basic point here is that debt sustainability issue is very much addressed nowadays. So that's the reason I'm just asking people to read Olivier Blanchard. I think Blanchard has already talked about this. The debt sustainability with zero interest lower bound, it poses some challenges, but then it gives rise to the question, what will be the optimal fiscal and monetary policy. Suppose I want to have 150% debt GDP ratio, okay? And that has to be there. Like in Japan, you have even higher than that. Then the question is that can we sustain this with some persistent deficits, right? That could be done, but up to a limit. That's my understanding. But that can get further complicated by the fact that the real interest rate is becoming negative and interest rate is appearing at the zero lower bound. So the real interest rate is I minus pi, the rate of inflation. If it is negative, then you have very little room there. Therefore, inflation, something will happen to inflation. So all these questions have to be dealt. What you need is really a structural model. I can't just give an answer to that. For that, you need to write a model and design optimal policy. Okay.
Uh, so we go to the next question by Anjan Sahu, who asks, does K-shaped economic growth boost the economy?
What economy?
K-shaped economic growth.
K-shaped economic growth, I don't know. Maybe he should explain that to me. Okay, what does that mean? Is he there or can he explain?
Anjan Sahu, if you can explain the question.
I don't know whether I can answer that. Let's see.
Okay, we go to the next question. Maybe, yeah. So fiscal theory.
I know the B-shaped growth. That's, but K-shaped. Okay, well, I think what he means is that K-shaped basically means that a sector is growing and the other sectors are falling. Basically, it is unbalanced growth. That's, I suspect. K-shaped meaning unbalanced growth, right? Digital sectors are booming and certain sectors are lagging, and so this is K-shaped. Is that what it does? Is that what is meant?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Exactly, sir. Yes.
Okay, if that is the case, I already talked about this. That K-shaped. What is your question, please, Anjan? Are you saying whether it is sustainable?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Is it sustainable?
Yeah, interesting question. I think I always thought about this, but it looks like whether it is sustainable or not. That depends on the time frame. That's the way I view it. I'm just giving you an answer. Since I don't know, I'm just basically thinking that, Keshav, suppose you have certain sectors like digital sectors, they're growing like crazy, and certain sectors are lagging. Then you might have a crowding out, and you will get some permanent displacement of some people. So you will have a rising inequality. So what you are asking is that it can give rise to stinking inequality, major inequality, right? Already the inequality is very high. So is this kind of inequality sustainable? Perhaps not, because it will give rise to demand problems, as I said, right? Who will go buy these products at the end of the day? Because this actually happened. One of the reasons the Great Recession happened, that people were not able to afford, right? Inequality reached such a proportion they could not afford a house, and therefore that and Federal Reserve, I think they were just operating on the principle the house prices will always go up. So if you cannot afford, we'll repossess your house and sell it. But prices were started declining because of the demand shock. That's the way I view it, and therefore they could not even sell, and therefore this Great Recession, this is like a housing crisis, and all these things happen. So I don't think the K-shaped scenario will be sustainable. It may be sustainable in the next 2 or 3 years, and eventually who knows what will happen, right?
Yeah, so Vidu has actually clarified on his question. He asked, how should one connect the technology shock in terms of, say, the usage of Zoom and the digital economy, etc., aiding the economy at the time of the pandemic?
Well, yeah, that part I already also thought about this. So what you need, actually, there are models right now. So you can have a model with heterogeneous production sectors where you have a digital economy, right? They have one kind of a technology, and another non-digital, they have another kind of technology, which is not computer intensive. So the question is that if there is it is quite possible that an expansion can happen for some time with this digital pool, but eventually some kind of demand recession is going to kick in, and possibly this will give rise to recession. Okay, so but people have already started thinking about this. As I've seen some papers where they look at differential. They look at heterogeneous economy, production economy with digital and non-digital sectors.
Sir, Arnob Dotto has a question. The Indian capital market has sustained and surprisingly done well in the pandemic times. Good liquidity could be one of the reasons. How long such measures can keep things afloat, and what kind of uncertain situations we can get in?
Well, this kind of question is interesting, but I'm not sure whether I'm qualified to answer this. Arnob is asking me to forecast. I'm not going to forecast. Economists cannot forecast. You already know there is a recent Financial Times article that we need to rethink about macroeconomics because macroeconomics cannot forecast. If you ask me how long will it continue, I can't answer that. Okay, but the question that you asked is interesting, that the capital market is booming. Capital market is supposed to boom because you already know that certain sectors, they are doing very well. So if you look at the portfolio and these digital sectors, they are quite predominant in the portfolio, then overall stock prices will go up. That's the way I view it. I had some retirement money I invested in the US, and they're doing very well. But that's happening because the digital sectors there is 20 particular stocks are doing very well. So the portfolio is driven by them. So capital market is doing well means what? What kind? Have you looked at the composition of the capital market? Are they digital stocks or non-digital stocks? I don't know. Okay.
Sir, I have a couple of naive questions which might sound actually
no questions are naive.
Sir, I fail to understand if we are going to say DSG is already a micro-founded model. So yes, if you're like maybe preparing a DSG model to understand the shocks, do we now need to introduce some kind of a health sector into this entire scenario and go even more into disaggregated level? I mean, otherwise, the health sector nowhere gets captured in the entire model, right?
So how do you envisage a health sector? How do you want to add it? No, can you tell me a bit? Huh?
No, I have no idea on how to add it, but my question is in terms of since we go at a disaggregated level, one by one.
No, but the question is, yeah. Just go ahead.
Yeah, what did you say? So do we need to now go into kind of sectoral disaggregation as well, beyond the government, banks, firms, and now even maybe in manufacturing sector, maybe social capital sectors like education, health, all these need to be modeled separately, something like that?
No, but I'm not very sympathetic to make these models gigantic and bringing additional elements. It depends on your research question. You should not be just adding a sector just without any reason, right? The question is, of course, health sector needs to be understood. But the way I will look at the health sector is that I should look at a public health policy goal of the government. So when I'm looking at government policy, as I said in my slides, that we need to sorry. So basically we need to look at, sorry, I lost that part, that public health policy needs to be formulated. So question is, if we are thinking about pandemic, like how do we really deal with the pandemic? We need vaccination. For that, we need money. The government needs resources. And these resources, how does it fit into the government budget constraint, right? So there is a government spending, it may be in infrastructure, government spending, maybe consumption, subsidy, government spending, maybe also on health, right? So in that way, you need to bring health, of course. But health sector, how they are going to be, what are they going to do? So health sector, are they going to produce some kind of health good? How is it going to help us, right? So why do we need that? So it all depends on, but I think it's definitely important to bring public health policy in government policy. So when you're looking up about fiscal policy, monetary policy, you should also think about a public health policy. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sir, I'll take one more question from Vidu, who asked, do we have any explanation of stagflation that looks like India may be headed to, and what could be the policy tools to counter that?
Actually, this question came up in some other, this is a good question. This question came up in some of the webinars I've previously attended. Stagflation, there is a broad consensus now, as I understand, that stagflation is less of a problem now. Because the problem is that because due to stagnation, we have inflation, this kind of scenario. So inflation is really not that much of a concern. What is really important is that due to stagnation, we are going to have unemployment, right? Mounting, staggering unemployment. We need to deal with that. So inflation is less of a problem because already people are, central banks are rethinking that perhaps we should think in terms of a 4% inflation, not 2%. So that's my personal view. I don't think that stagflation is a big problem that we need to think about after the pandemic. Good question, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, sir, I think we are almost, I think the chat box is full and I think we are done with the questions. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Taking your time out.
Thank you very much for all these very lively questions and audience. And then this is good for me also to rethink.
Okay, sir. So maybe, so we'll upload this session on YouTube and then I'll share you the
okay,
link.
thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for
everyone.
inviting me again. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, sir. Thank you, everyone.